If you were to pitch Urban Animal to, let's say, a studio executive, and you have like 15 seconds to do it, what would you say?
I'd say think Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Jurassic Park via Riverdale.
Oh
That's
wow.
good, actually. That is way better than what I would have come up
What
with.
would you have
So
said, Justin?
I would have it's funny. So for a lot of the series that I work on, I actually usually work pretty hard to be able to explain things into one sentence, and I have never gotten one to my satisfaction with Urban Animal. So it would have been something like it's about a high school student who finds out that he is an ancient nature spirit and has to save all mankind or some such kind of thing, which is not great. Like John's thing is way better, and I need to write it down because we will probably need to pitch executives on it at some point.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Comics Cube. I am with John Amor and Justin Jordan, cartoon Justin Jordan, and we're talking Urban Animal. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. It's
Good.
it's
I'm good. How are you?
It's there's a time difference here, around
Little
11
bit.
hours, 13 hours. Yeah. So my first question is going to be to John here because I actually knew Urban Animal 10 years ago because I got the
Oh no.
first couple of issues from you at a local Comic Con. So John and I are from the same country. We're both from the Philippines, and I actually got it, but not the same island.
Correct.
So I actually got it, and I was wondering what prompted you to come up with the idea for Urban Animal and then change it.
Yeah, and then change it. Well, uh, I guess the timing is significant because I was in college when I first drew the original concept. And it wasn't called Urban Animal then. And this was 2001, if you can believe that. By the quality of the art, you probably can believe that. But it was very autobiographical, and I pretty much just drew myself surrounded by my college friends. But the bones of the story were still there. It was still a kid who could transform into monsters. Um, but I couldn't print it in an actual comic book format until 2011 because that is when I had the resources to do so and had the knew exactly what to do proper lettering and stuff. But after 2011, it took what, Justin, like 5-6 more years before we actually uh, had a proper direction and had a better idea for how to make a story that was more, how do we say this, widely palatable or widely relatable. So if you and you say you read the original series, you can see that the original one is very locally flavored, whereas the current iteration of Urban Animal, we intentionally make it vague where it's set so that a lot of people can relate to it and it doesn't matter.
And
The
how,
location of Walker's Point is an ongoing mystery, although we've kind of narrowed it down now.
A little bit.
It's kind of funny. I a lot of my comics when they take place in I realized this over the years that barring one or two comics that are explicitly somewhere, they mostly take place in some vague areas. A lot of them take place in the city, which ends up being basically New York, Baltimore, because those are the cities I spend the most time in. So, like wherever I'm writing a city, they kind of end up being like the template for it. So that's why I keep things vague. Walker's Point is actually less that way, but that tends to be the way for comics for me.
So when you're writing Walker's Point, Justin, do you think of your hometown?
A bit. I will tell you that when I am thinking about particularly the high school, what I am picturing is the high school that I went to, and actually, honestly, the Walker Point High School is not actually visually that different from from the high school I went to, which I don't know if that's luck or if it just says about the sort of genericness of high schools in the U.S. that they are often very similar. But yeah, it ended up looking a lot like that. So yeah, that is what I am typically thinking of.
The universality. It actually also looks like the high school I went to, and I went to high school
Right.
in the Philippines. You designed that high school, John?
I did, but I am not thinking about Davao when I am drawing Walker's Point. I'm actually thinking about Cebu, where I went to college. And a lot of the sprawling campus of Walker's Point High School is inspired by UP Cebu, just like the original Urban Animal comic.
And so how did the two of you meet? Justin, you recall how you got roped into this?
I recall how I got roped into this. I don't actually recall how John and I met at this point.
It was a rainy night.
It's been a while. John and I have known each other for, I don't know, 15 years, more?
Something like that.
I know for sure it goes back to at least 2007, and I suspect it's earlier than that. And I was thinking about this. I'm like, I genuinely don't recall. Like, I would guess one or the other of us emailed the other, given.
I had to do some digging. Because this question has come up enough, right? So I wanted to actually narrow it down. I saw one of your ads, Justin, on digital webbing when you were looking for an artist for one of your very first projects. You were yet unpublished then, and so you were looking for a pencil or inker for Overthrow, I believe.
Oh,
and
there you go.
That makes it 2007. And I sent you samples, and then we became buddies from there. And then it's actually funny. And Justin can probably fill this in. We have been pitching consistently every other year a new project. We've been pitching to publishers a new project since 2008. And then, can you confirm that, Justin?
Yeah, no, that sounds right. Yeah, it's been a bunch. It's funny because it's how comics kind of rolls sometimes. It's like I did. So we're coming up on, this year will be the 11th anniversary, or the 10th anniversary rather, of Luther Strode actually coming out. So it started coming out in 2011, and I had actually pitched Trad Moore, the artist on it, and Felipe, the colorist, on it in 2009. And we got accepted by Image towards the end of 2009. The point of all this being, that was I started trying to break in the comics in around 2001 as well. So both breaking in the comics and actually John and I getting a comic to actually like go somewhere both took a bit of time, which is often how comics goes. And It's funny because they have both kind of worked out, because Urban Animal is a pretty decent sized hit. We're not the big dogs on Webtoons, but we do well. We're in that upper probably 20%, I would venture, of them. And compared to like quote unquote regular comics, like direct market US comics, like our readership is enormous. So both of those were kind of like the 10 years to an overnight success kind of thing.
Yeah. So how did you get roped into this, Justin?
So as mentioned, we've been pitching things for a few years now, which, it's funny, all those things are still things that I think are good projects, and were and are viable. Overthrow was a cool book. I think to a certain extent the market has maybe moved past it a bit, just in terms of what you can do with creator-owned stuff. It was fundamentally a superhero book, and it's hard to do creator-owned superhero. But we had been pitching stuff, and I got hooked up with Webtoons at a convention. I managed to weasel my way into a Webtoons dinner, and I'm not recommending that people do this sort of thing, right? Like this is the kind of thing, whenever people ask me about like career stuff, like I often have ended up doing things in ways that I realize are not replicable, so they're not meant to be taken as advice. So one of the things that I've managed to do in urban and Webtoons is an example of that is rather than like finding an editor and pitching to an editor, like I just got introduced, figured out which guy at the dinner was the highest up on the totem pole. It was actually is the director of North American content. And I just said to him, I'm like, I do this, and this comic. This was like 2016. So I had, 5 years of doing a bunch of comics professionally. And he's like, yeah, send us stuff. And so I was looking at the Webtoon stuff and I was like, oh yeah, like John's style would fit in really well here. And we had been trying to work on something. So we actually came up with another project, which like Overthrow and Jenny Strange and some of the other stuff we had worked on, I actually still think is like a cool concept. But Webtoons liked it, but they pointed out like it's fundamentally not a Webtoons book or not a Webtoons series. Just there's this, when you're doing a Webtoon sort of thing, there is this, you've got to take the format into account, right? Like if your listeners are not familiar with Webtoons format, it's infinite scroll that is optimized to be read basically on a cell phone. So you're looking at like a panel at a time.
And vertically.
Vertically. And that necessitates that things like you to a certain extent can't do like big images. And the thing we had pitched on them kind of required it and kind of had this what it was it was a thing called Travelers that was about humanity had basically taken to living in these things. There were essentially the Jawa sandcrawler things from Star Wars, these big mobile kind of cities. And that's just not a Webtoon book just because of the visuals of it. But they like John's art and they like me. So they were like, pitch something else. And I was like, all right. And John suggested Urban Animal, which he had done. I knew of Urban Animal the entire time that John and I have known each other. So it's like, yeah, Urban Animal feels right. So we took the basic characters and stuff and then sort of fleshed out this really large kind of mythological structure for all of that to exist in. Straight up, we were kind of channeling like, anime and manga, going hardcore into like the lore and like the level, that kind of stuff. And for my part, I was also to a certain extent trying to kind of replicate the feel of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and stuff that I thought was really, kind of cool and kind of flexing those muscles. And so we ended up, which all worked out because one of the things that Webtoons really liked about the pitch was that like the pitch document I sent them was like, this is how the season's going to go. This is how future seasons were going to go. And here is all this world building, which, I caution new writers against getting too caught up in the world building because a lot of newbie writers kind of do world building and then never tell a story. But I will say doing that world building can sometimes be useful when you're pitching a concept because if you're good at explaining it to people, it allows them to see kind of the larger structure and the hooks of it. And Webtoons was into it. It was a pretty easy pitch process, actually. It didn't take very long. And so we were good to go. So that's how I got roped into this part of it.
John, if you were to pitch Urban Animal to, let's say, a studio executive and you have like 15 seconds to do it, what would you say?
I'd say think Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Jurassic Park via Riverdale.
That's good, actually. That is way better than what I would have come up with.
What would you have said, Justin?
I would have, it's funny. So for a lot of the series that I work on, I actually usually work pretty hard to be able to explain things in the one sentence, and I have never gotten one to my satisfaction with Urban Animal. So it would have been something like, it's about a high school student who finds out that he is an ancient nature spirit and has to save all mankind or some such kind of thing, which is not great. Like John's thing is way better, and I need to write it down because we will probably need to pitch executives on it at some point. So
guys, I did it. We're writing that down.
Don't worry, this is going to be recorded.
No, that's fair.
You'll be able to
I also
see.
can't stand the sound of my own voice, so I'm gonna try to write it down now so I don't have to listen to it later. I realized it was John that said it, but I'd have to go through my own voice to find the clip. So.
And could you take turns describing the main character and what Joe means to you?
Oh man, can you do that first, Justin? Because it's a little personal. It's a little personal question.
I can. I really like Joe. Joe is fundamentally a good kid who means well for his family and his friends. He's loyal and he's kind, which is why he has those friends. But the tricky part about talking about Joe is there are some very significant spoilers for what goes on with Joe, and I'm debating how much of those to reveal.
I actually didn't know if I should conduct this interview as if we're talking to people who haven't read it, or as if we're talking to people who have read all 80 plus.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to try to be kind of vague about it. I will say that one of what Joe finds out his issues are relate to both identity and regret, and I think they're interesting concepts, and they're interesting in Joe because he is such a fundamentally decent person who has finds out that he has a past that he doesn't fully understand, and he has to confront that. Would be what I would say about Joe.
Right. For me, as I mentioned, the original Urban Animal was semi-autobiographical because I basically designed Joe after myself. Like I had that haircut in college, the high top fade, and I had those friends, and I was in a band in college. So every time I draw Joe, I don't even need to think about it because I'm just channeling how I feel I look anyway. And yeah, he was a good kid. I like to think he's a good kid, and he's got his teen urges, as everybody did, but fundamentally, it's a nature versus nurture story, right? So he is prone to impulsiveness, as we think we've done a good job of showing in certain episodes of the series, but he answers to a higher calling, but sometimes he himself is not aware of it. He's not sure if it's something intrinsic in him or if it's just a higher calling for him. But generally, we like to think of Joe as an everyman who has a lot of potential. So I think that's the best way I can describe him.
Joe is, of course, this is the premise of the book, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything. Joe is of course is a chimera.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has the power to change into animals or combinations of animals and everything. And I have to ask, Justin, you can go first on this. What goes into the chimera? Like all of the elements, all of the different power levels and everything. How much thought is put into that stuff?
A lot. There are some pretty in-depth foundational documents about how all that works, and there are pretty strict rules about it. I like the author Brandon Sanderson, and Brandon Sanderson writes prose, and he does a lot of things right. At least he does a lot of things right for creating books that I like. But one of the things he's really known for is that he creates these magic systems that are essentially hard magic systems in the sense that the rules are so well defined that some of his really intense readers have been able to figure out stuff that's not actually in the book yet just by extrapolating what the rules are. Have not gone quite to that level of like whole hog, but like it's one of those deals where if a reader asks me what Chimera can do and what the limits are and what the rules are, I do have answers to that. So we we worked on it, and I said I don't want to act like that it's just me. A lot of the level stuff is John too, and that we have worked together on doing that. But we do have these kind of things about like what the rules of like, you know, Chimera are. So I mean, one of the mundane things, right, is like working out like what sizes they can be, and it's, you know, there are rules about what sizes they're limited to, which it tends to be it's either the animal that they're changing into or their own. So, for instance, Corkindale, who can turn into rats, can also turn into a rat the size of a person, but that's the maximum on his size. He is not going to be capable of turning into a polar bear sized rat because rats is all he can do. So he doesn't have that kind of option. And a lot of it is thinking about how those various things interact and stuff. So one of the trying to be vague here, one of the characters that appears can turn into forms that are quite gigantic. And what is going on when he does that is he's using parts of things that have existed in deep prehistoric times and mixing them with more modern animals and stuff to be able to get giant versions of stuff. And that is not willy-nilly. Like there are rules and thought behind like how that occurs and how that goes. And it's the same way with like things like, you know, the way that Chimera reincarnate or don't and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's part of the fun of it is, you know, there's this deep sense of lore, which I think readers really like and respond well to. And I feel obligated to like have that stuff answered in advance. I don't. And you know, there is obviously with all writing, there is some amount of freestyling and all that kind of stuff, but mostly it's like we've got this framework and come up with a new idea, and it's like, okay, how does it fit within the framework? So while we expand stuff a bit, we have a basic and pretty detailed set of rules that govern how all of the Chimera stuff works, and you know, the stuff with the Devourers and that kind of stuff all follows a rule set that we have defined in advance.
Justin mentioned Sanderson. I myself am a Dungeons and Dragons nerd. Anybody familiar with that game knows that the druid class can turn into animals. So in my head, every chimera in our universe is a druid, except they're not all the same level, and they all specialize in different things depending on which path you take as you mature as a chimera. So even though they're all this same class, they all have different capabilities.
And how do you depict all of this visually, John? Like what's the thought process like?
Well, apart from the animals that they become, obviously, a key thing that Justin and I figured out early on was that eye color is key in depicting power levels. We explained that in season 2 in episode 47 or 48, where a low-level chimera will be yellow and then becomes red and then it becomes blue. And blue is pretty much the highest level that is known. And depending on which character you look at...
That is known?
That might be a spoiler, but we'll see. Depending on which character you look at and looking at their eye color, you can get an idea of just how powerful that character is.
And what about all of the other stuff? Like just, you know, mixing certain animals together. Like how do you design it? Like what's the conceptualization process like? So and how much do you work with each other on this? Do you give a design and then comments or what?
I hope Justin doesn't mind me saying this. Sometimes in the script, he will just say, "Joe turns into a cool thing. Take it away, John." And I'm like, all right, no pressure.
That is trust. That is trust in your artist.
It is, and that's one of the things. It is the benefit of having been friends with John for a long time, and we've worked together a lot at this point. Actually, now John is the artist, and has been for a while. Is the artist that I have done the most actual work with. We have done more Urban Animal than I have done any other project, but it's also way more than I have done with any one person. I think. Trying to think. Yeah, Trad is the only other artist that done it. And so with Urban Animal right now, we've probably done 27 or 28 standard comic book singles worth of stuff. So and that's not counting all the pitches we've done for the decade prior to that. So we have worked together a lot. So I feel comfortable doing that kind of stuff. I occasionally specify animals and stuff, but at this point, it is more often than not. I just go for it, John. You know what I mean? The closest I get to any sort of thing is like, it needs to be something that flies, or
yeah,
you know, that kind of stuff.
Something with poison, something with 4 legs, and I will.
So let me ask: when the pterodactyl the first time, whose choice was that?
Whose choice was that? Just
I think the pterodactyl was in the script.
Okay,
I think it was too. Because it's telling that he becomes that, right?
Yeah, like that's plot relevant. So that one was in the script. And that tends to be how it kind of rolls. Like if I am that specific, it's usually that the animal is meant to be a clue or something, you know, that'll go down those sort of things. And some of it we don't necessarily talk about, but it's just sort of implicit. So like I've given some guidance on Remus, a character that's coming up, but like I say guidance like we were on the same page anyhow. So like it's like, well, yeah.
Ooh, hot scoop. That's a hot scoop for you, Dewey.
I don't think it's so hot a scoop considering all of the comments have kind of predicted such a character being introduced.
He's coming.
Considering that there's been a character named Romulus.
Yeah, I do like in the comments, they're like, oh, Remus has been teased for so long. I'm like, he did not get mentioned before this season and has only been brought up like twice. But you know, when you've got a dedicated fan base, they're into that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I want to talk about your fan base later because some of those guys are super devoted.
There's a lot of theory crafting going on.
Yeah,
it's awesome. That's one of my favorite things. I love it.
And speaking of design elements and, you know, working out all of the story elements and design elements, what about what about the human characters? How much of those character dynamics did you work out in advance? Did you do the whole Alan Moore big numbers plot charts? I'm kidding.
Go ahead, Justin.
So the character dynamics are largely worked out ahead of time. And so part of that is like a process sort of thing. So the reason I am hesitating, other than the fact that I've not been awake all that long, is there are two-ish answers to that question, which is the initial group of characters and stuff. John had, you know, created the visuals and that kind of stuff, and then we had worked out what the inner band main character like sort of interactions were. Then as we've gone on, so the way that the seasons work is that before we start, I say ideally it would be before we start. They tend to actually overlap. Like John is working on season 4, and while we know where season 4 is going, we're only about halfway through plotting out the episode by episode thing. But that is how Urban Animal works. Is that there is this large document that overlays. There's a layout of like where the season is going. And then there was an episode by episode thing that we're going from. And the character stuff, a good bit of it emerges in that document. Some of it kind of rolls out when the season is going. For instance, there's a relationship that Phoebe has in season 3 that largely emerged kind of while we were doing it. Like, it wasn't not planned ahead of time, but like a lot of the details and dynamics of it just sort of emerged from what was going on as we were actually like doing the book. And
it was weirdly, sorry to interrupt, the Phoebe thing in season 3, it was weirdly character driven, right? And it just made sense for that to happen.
Told you this is one of those things that wrote itself.
Yeah, to a large extent. We had trying to. This is not something that I think is like going to be terribly spoiler thing, but like, so I'll talk a little more about it than I would about the Joe stuff. But Phoebe ends up getting badly hurt at the end of season 2, And so in season 3, she's still recovering from those injuries. So in season 3, she's using her crutch to get around, and she's got some scarring and that kind of stuff. And she ends up getting in a relationship with another character who was mutilated by one of the soul parasites in season 1, and that they had both been messed up by supernatural entities. It seemed like a kind of point of commonality to them, and so that relationship emerged from them. There is more to that relationship that is fairly spoilery that I'm sort of talking around, but yeah, that relationship, you know, sort of built out of that kind of stuff. And honestly, like stuff like the bully antagonists eventually end up on Team Urban Animal. That was sort of stuff that emerged in the writing too, because it just made sense from where the characters were going. Now, what I will say is that I try to make all the plot choices be character driven, in the sense of, okay, we had them at this point, where is the logical outflow of that in a way that tells an interesting story? And so it's not like when we were doing the pre-plotting for a season that I am trying to make the characters like go a certain way, to the extent that like there's an artificiality to it. So some stuff arrives like you're just writing the script and you're like, oh, okay, this relationship should be this way. So like Sienna's relationship with Sean, like I knew that Sienna and Sean would be interacting because it made sense for who Sean is as a character to be protective of her. How she reacted to that and how they bonded over the course of the season, though, just emerged when we were actually writing the episodes.
Yeah. You were also asking about the original inspiration for the characters. Justin and I did not realize this until season 2, actually. Late season 2. We didn't realize that the main group of characters is essentially Gen 13, for all you 90s fans. So Phoebe is Fairchild. Charlotte is Roxy. Or Free.
Yeah.
Sean is
Burnout. Yeah.
Paolo is Grunge. And then we put Joe in there, you know? And then it just created this fun dynamic that we didn't even realize we had. And we already had that template in our head from being 90s comics fans. So it was just a fun coincidence.
Oh, subconsciously?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably.
It works out.
So.
We're all the same age.
It's
26.
Yes, 26.
25.
Yeah, it's been fun, and it is interesting. I'll faff on a bit about the character thing, because it's one of the things that I actually really enjoy about writing Urban Animal, which I really enjoy writing Urban Animal. Although season 3 was hard as hell to write, but season 4 so far has been much easier. What I don't recommend to writers out there is having these weird timeline shenanigans going on, because that makes your life really complicated.
Yeah, because season 3 you did this whole alternating every episode thing.
Yeah,
and it's just a crap ton of work, right? Like it's a crap ton of work aligning those timelines and like making sure that stuff develops and that people were engaged and all that kind of stuff. It made sense for the season, but like I hope to not do it again. I don't think it will be necessary. But it's fun with the character stuff, because like, so in season 2, people were sort of reacting to season 1. I say people, what I mean is the characters reacting to stuff that came out in season 1. And there are secrets that they're keeping from each other, and they're also being sort of messed with by an outside influence. And so Fletcher ends up being the voice of reason there, and that was a really natural role for Fletcher, because we had in season 1 kind of given Fletcher this sort of role as like the team stoic and
Rainmaker.
And also honestly it's a bit of Oz from Buffy the Vampire Slayer went into
Mm.
Fletcher there. And so it was nice that just worked out into a really organic beat. Like someone would have needed to fill that role anyhow, but the way the character dynamics worked, it was totally really like pleasing to me that Fletcher just slid into that role in a way that like, yeah, that feels like how that would have gone if this were a real world sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like that feels like that character would do that thing. It's good to not have to like try and force people, you know, into these roles. And that's one of the things when you're building like a group dynamic, and I'm getting a bit into the weeds about writing stuff, but like
That's good.
One of the things about here's a weird left turn. So one of the things about that was wrong with the early Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. television show, right?
Here we go.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. eventually became a really entertaining show, but in the first half of season one of the fundamental problems that the show has is that it only actually had two characters. It had six actors, but three of them were playing stoic agent person, and three of them were playing quirky science type. And that was it. And that is a bad mix. They got out of that. They wrote their way out of it, and they became distinct characters. So when I set up like a team dynamic and that kind of stuff, I'm always kind of looking at how these characters bounce off each other and cause conflict. And I mean conflict in a way that is organic. They are friends. They're not assholes to each other, but they are also different people, and they react to different problems differently. And that's by design. Like, you know, it was very intentional that Joe reacts to problems differently to Paula, who reacts to things differently to Charlotte. And you know, you get that dynamic right. If you get that mix right from the beginning, and you don't always, it gives you a lot of, it makes it easier to tell stories because a lot of stuff spins out of that because you've got the right character mix. And I think when we were doing Urban Animal, we actually got that right character mix kind of from the start, which is as much luck as skill. I think, honestly, like sometimes you just get it. And sometimes, you know, you unintentionally riff on Gen 13. So
yeah. Well, speaking of the characters, right? The strength of the characters, there was a real risk with season 3 because for most of I want to say for half the season, the main character isn't even in the book.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to the strength of the side characters that people still kept reading and still kept getting engaged by what was going on. And we haven't even discussed Corkindale yet. So
he's in the book.
Yeah. To in a way he is.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to being difficult to write, like season 3 was like a big risk. I was glad that people went along with it. We didn't actually lose any readers. Our numbers have stayed strong, and actually more people started paying for it. So I guess that part worked. But you know, it was good. It was one of the problems. I say problems. If I were a real person and not a cartoon version of me, I would be doing air quotes. But one of the problems with Urban Animal is that we keep creating characters that are interesting to me, and then like we feel sort of like you need to keep working them into the story. So like, you know, but you still only got 25 to 28 episodes of 40 to 60 panels. So like it becomes like a game of whack-a-mole to be like, I need to check in with Sienna just so we don't forget that she exists and that kind of stuff.
It's a good problem to have, though.
That's what Sanderson does
for you.
That's what Sanderson does.
Yeah. That absolutely is what Sanderson does. That Stormlight Archive has acquired quite a lot of characters.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the reasons that season 3 succeeded, despite the fact that the main character isn't really in it, is because specifically you have such a strong group of supporting characters. I see it in the comments. Everybody's so invested in all of these characters, especially I'll just say it, Kagan. I noticed.
Oh yeah.
Everybody loves Kagan.
Is she the most popular character?
I think she might be. She might be more popular than Joe at this point, I think. Anyway.
I actually think she is.
Honestly, I have a sneaking suspicion that Joe might actually be like number 3 on the list.
It would be Kagan.
I think it probably goes Kagan,
Phoebe.
Corkindale, Joe.
Oh, Corkindale.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I
People
can see
really-
that. I
And
can
that's
see
awesome.
that. How do you feel about that, John? Seeing as
Totally
how
fine. This is a
Oh,
character. Kagan is a character that we didn't have the design for until the last couple of months of season 1, and she basically flowed from the stylus, uh, like magic, because I did not do any initial sketches, and I just figured this is somebody that's been around from the Mesozoic or the caveman era, and we needed to make that make sense. But she's also been living outside society, but she's intelligent, and she's super powerful. And we just, well, I came up with a design that was simple but powerful, and it stuck, and a lot of it apparently resonated with a lot of people. And she's strongly written by Justin, and I personally am a huge fan of the character as well. So I'm super happy that she's everybody's favorite. She's a fan favorite.
yeah, every time she's in trouble, I see the top comments are always like, she better not die.
I'm gonna riot.
I'm gonna riot.
Kagan is an interesting example, I hope. But Kagan is interesting in that she really is a character that emerged from the writing and not the preseason kind of plotting. So in season 1, she existed. Like, that was all part of the plot. But like, and what she was trying to do in season 1 was all plotted out ahead of time. But her actual relationship with Joe and like how their history actually worked and all that kind of stuff, that straight up emerged from just writing the character in the thing. And it was good. That is one of the benefits of having a good solid foundation for your story, is that you can slot stuff like that in when it seems to like really be working. And it really did. I think, at least for me, and I realize I write it, so, biased, but I think Joe and Kagan's relationship is probably one of the best things about the series. And it feels really kind of real to me and organic. And I think that it ends up being not the relationship that people expect, which you can see in the comments, because there's a lot of like, wait, are we supposed to be shipping them or not kind of stuff going on there.
That's the constant question. Almost every episode that she appears in, people are asking that.
There's an emotional moment between them in season 3 where I saw the comments were like, I didn't know I needed that panel in my life. I think you both know which panel I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
I do.
Oh yeah,
I am very pleased with that panel. That was a good panel. John did good.
That was an excellent panel. The look on Kagan's face on that one was
thanks,
like,
man.
Okay.
A lot of people probably don't know, but Kagan, the design for that character is based on my wife, my real life wife, who has a powerful mane of hair, raven-haired beauty in my life, and she makes music. So a lot of the episode titles, which are songs, are actually handpicked by her in most cases. So she helps a lot with the production of the book, and me and Justin actually owe her royalties at this point.
That's fair.
I noticed that some of the song titles are from Filipino bands.
A couple. Yeah.
It's how do I put this? It's nice for me to see that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to slot that in more. As early as season 1, we were doing songs from like Franco, I think.
And also, like, it's just nice for me to see, something like this resonating so well with an international audience, where the main character is a half Filipino.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. As the seasons have progressed, I have tried to sneak in, and none of this is in the script. I've tried to sneak in little Filipino things, like in season 2, right before the Devourer visits Joe in his house, he is microwaving a plate of adobo, which falls to the ground as he rushes to the door. And then sometimes his dad will blurt out a Filipino expletive, like in season 3, that I'm not gonna get into.
Let me say something else, Justin. I too eat fried chicken with a fork.
Monsters, both of you. That reminds me, we need to bring that up again in the season 3 Q&A.
Yeah.
Just
high dexterity.
I've commented on it lately, so
bring it back as a shirt, maybe.
I love how like the rest of the world just thinks it's really weird, and we're like,
What?
I mean, you don't?
Monsters. Yeah. It's the equivalent of like eating pizza by rolling it up into a burrito shape and eating it. Like it's just, yeah, you can do it, but should you?
That's
Man,
actually not a bad idea.
I went to KFC once in Virginia, and they didn't give me a fork, and I was like, where are my utensils? Okay, and another thing about having a document that outlines your story beforehand is I noticed that you're able to pepper in these small reveals that just make sense. So, um, for example, there is a YouTube channel / Reddit called The Weirdness, where somebody is tracking down all of the weird stuff that is happening in town. The identity of that person makes sense once revealed, but you're able to do it in such a way that it kind of builds up to it, and it's never a big giant exposition type reveal when that happens.
Mm.
One of the characters is trans. Never it only comes up when it's a natural thing to be mentioned in the dialogue. One of the characters has sisters named after a particular TV show. um I just think that's really interesting how organic that you guys are able to make it
Yeah, I
seem.
like that aspect of it. We actually work really hard at that. Part of the plotting process of each season actually, and it is the advantage of knowing where we're going, right? Is that we're able to do that stuff. So one of the plotting parts of each season is actually parceling out those kind of hints and where we're going and where we're revealing and that kind of stuff. Which it, to me anyhow, makes the world feel bigger and real. Like, it makes it feel like there is stuff going on outside the panel and that sort of thing. And it's also nice to, this goes back into that kind of fan theorizing thing, which I love. It is one of my favorite things, is that since we do that, people have started to look for those kind of clues, and so they will theorize about stuff, sometimes really accurately. Like some people are really on it, which is really satisfying. And so we're able to kind of do that kind of stuff. But yeah, and some of that stuff, especially the character stuff, is it's a good way, hopefully, if I'm doing my job right, the way the characters are reacting when you start to find out those tidbits of that kind of stuff, like when you find out what happened to Phoebe's older sister, for instance. My hope is that for the reader, you look back at everything she has done to that point and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's that's been there all along. And it's the same way with even in stuff that is a little more kind of sensitive and stuff, like it's important for me that the trans character is a real character and not just a example of
token.
Their transness is not the only aspect of them. And I hope they're a real character who happens to be trans rather than a capital T, capital C trans character, at the risk of, I hope people are not offended by that. We're trying to treat it with the sort of care that I think it deserves, because it is a sensitive real world thing, but it is also one of those things that over the years, at the risk of straying out here, I do think the representation thing matters. On one hand, I'm a straight white American dude, right? So I am not underrepresented in media. But
you are also a cartoon.
What's that?
You are also a cartoon.
Yeah. But at the same time, while I am strong like bull, like I've been, overweight my entire life. And the fact that heroic, like badass characters are almost never fat guys was not lost on me, right? Like, and it's been one of those things where I've realized that, like, you know, if you have an opportunity to like kind of show people, to give people something that they can see in themselves, it makes for a better story, and it makes for something the audience can hopefully relate to. So we've kind of tried to do that and stuff. And we've tried to do it in a way that feels right and feels good for the story. It hopefully does not feel like we are pandering. And part of that, building in these different aspects and different kind of clues and hints and stuff, is a way of doing that, and a way of giving that world that depth for the audience.
Yeah, it's another example is when you find out that one of the characters has two moms, and she just says it. She just says it. It's not made a big deal out of until much later when somebody does make a big deal out of it. So, that's do you guys have a favorite character to draw, to write, or
Justin, who's your favorite character to draw?
Yeah, my favorite character to draw is me.
I would say to draw, I think my favorite is Kagan, personally.
because she's based on your wife?
And also, she's just a fun design. Right. The spiky hair and the morphing. We try to do the, how do I phrase this so it doesn't spoil? If you notice, ever since season 1, all her forms are predatory animals, every single one.
You okay?
So that's a fun element that I always keep in the back of my head when I'm thinking up forms for her. Joe is not that way. So as soon as we introduced Kagan into the mix, I ended up opening a whole different catalog of animals that I could suddenly draw now, and it was fine. And so just having that freedom was fun for me, and so she's always exciting to work on.
What about you, Justin? Favorite character to write?
Oh man, it is hard to say. So there is actually a difference between my favorite character and my favorite character to write. My favorite character to write actually is probably Han, the Monkey King, because he's just. I realize I'm the one who writes him, but he's hysterical. At least when I am writing it, it cracks me up. Like and the way John draws him just nails it. Like, he's just so funny. Like, there's a bit where he's like giving the thumbs up, and I just lost it when I drew that panel. So
that was hilarious, by the way.
What's that?
That was hilarious when he gives the thumbs up.
It's just It's probably the funniest moment of the series, which there is some funny bits in the series, so that one stands out.
Han is our Deadpool, right? Han is our Deadpool, pretty much.
Yeah, he is 1,000% our Deadpool. Yeah. I think my favorite character overall, man, it's probably also Kagan. Like,
oh no!
Are we sure this comic is about Joe?
It is hard to keep the focus on him.
Yeah.
It probably my alternating top 3 ends up being kind of Kagan, Joe, and Charlotte.
Interesting.
Charlotte's got a familiar last name there to comics fans.
She sure does. Which it's kind of funny. It's funny to me because I mostly work in direct market American comics, which is, you know, if you're an American, when you think of comics, that's what you're thinking of, which is a ramble for another whole other time. So it is funny to me that we've named her Deconic, and like in the comments, like basically 0 people get that reference because they're just outside that aspect of comics. Like, they're Webtoons readers. They don't know who Kelly Sue is, like, mostly. Like, so, you know, it's just that's one of those things that drives home that this is a different audience than I'm usually working to. Because if I did that in a regular comic, everybody would be like, oh, yeah, you know what I mean?
That's actually my next question. How different is the Webtoons audience? Because, you know, everybody is talking a lot about, you know, a lot of people are talking about like, oh, comics are a dying art form, or it's a dying industry and stuff. But the Webtoons audience is just completely untapped by that part of the market, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah.
and I will go on my hopefully brief rant about that. Yes, I know, and I do this myself, right? So in when I'm talking to people, and I'm being specific about the American audience, partly because I don't know about what the Philippines audience how they view comics beyond knowing John. And also, I know this is different in other countries, but certainly when you're talking to an American audience, if you say comics, what people are thinking of is direct market comics, which is Marvel, DC, and others, and they're sold in comic book shops, almost exclusively in comic book shops, some bookstores for the trades, and that is comics.
They never even talk
But
about Archie, right? Archie doesn't even count,
No.
right?
Archie doesn't, which is funny because Archie sells a lot of comics, and they sell it in places that typically you don't find comics now. But that is not comics, right? That's when people say stuff like comics is dying, that's what they're talking about. And it's not true there either. But like they're ignoring the fact that like there's the bookstore market, which is vast by way of a thing like Dave Pilkey's Dogman,
Dave
right?
Pilkey,
Like
yeah.
the newest printing of that was 5 million copies in the initial print run. And while Dogman is for younger readers, it is unquestionably a comic. Like that's a comic book, right? It's great. And if you go a little older, you get Raina Telgemeier stuff, and like her stuff is selling. Raina Telgemeier by herself has outsold some publishers in the direct market. You know what I mean? she's when she does a book, like she's selling 1 million copies of it, right? So there's that.
Oh
That
yeah, Raina
market
Telgemeier is her own brand.
she is.
Yeah, at this point.
Raina is good friends with a good friend of mine, and like when Raina does stuff at schools or libraries, it's like the fucking I'm old. It's the Beatles basically have shown up. Like it's kids just losing their mind over Raina, right? It's the same way with like Dave Pilkey stuff.
Mhm.
My good buddy has 4 sons, the oldest of whom's 15, but 2 of them are younger, and they're right in the Dogman age bracket, and they went and saw Pilkey at this thing, and it was this huge event, and the kids were just losing their mind. I'm surprised none of them passed out. So they're a big deal. And then you've got U.S. manga translations, which also outsell regular U.S. direct market comics, and then you've got Webtoons and webcomics generally, but we'll focus on Webtoons, and it's a gigantic audience. And the thing is of those like kind of 4 audiences, like there's shockingly little overlap, right? Like some things overlap more than others. Like it is weird how siloed they are.
Just
That's
to be
like
clear on this, you guys, at this moment that I'm doing this interview, you guys have 492,700 followers.
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
That's
and
ridiculous,
again,
isn't it?
and
Are you
so,
surprised at that number?
yes,
I was I had just to flashback a bit to season 1, episode 1. I had a panic attack when I saw how many likes we were getting, because every time I refreshed, it gained like 10, 20, 30 more likes, and it was exponential that first day. And I had never done anything with that sort of skyrocketing audience, So it was shocking, exciting, a little
And
scary.
you've been nominated for an Eisner.
Yeah, it was 2015. But with Urban Animal, with the weekly release, the reaction is so immediate, and we're not used to something like that. Certainly, I'm not.
No, not at all.
And yeah, Justin, you can continue you were saying, yeah. There's no overlap.
The benchmark in the direct market, and I mean benchmark literally, is Batman, right? So when you look at direct market sales figures, I realize we're going a bit in the weeds here, but when you look at direct market sales figures, what you're actually usually looking at is they take Batman as like the standard, and then everything else sells some proportion of Batman. So Batman literally is the standard, and Batman typically sells 80 to 100,000 copies a month.
Yeah.
Which we get about that readership every week, and we have 500,000 subscribers, and by Webtoon standards, like I said, we're not top tier. You know, we're not Lore Olympus, and we're not Let's Play, which get multiples of what we get. So just the sheer scale of it is astonishing. And yeah, the fact that they're all so separate, right? Like there's some overlap between the Webtoons audience and the manga audience, and you know, there's some overlap between manga and direct market comics and stuff. But like straight up, like if I went into a comic book store and mentioned Urban Animal, I'm gonna get like dull stares, basically. But what? And likewise, in a lot of comic book shops, not all, but a lot, you mention somebody like Rega Telgemeier, and they're like, "Who the hell's that?"
Yeah,
like, that's comics, man. And it's frustrating to me as somebody who I do quite like direct market comics, and I do like single issue kind of comics and that kind of stuff. It is frustrating to me that they're overlooking these, to a large extent, these vast audiences of people who like the comics form, you know, and there's no question, while Webtoons does this infinite scroll and it's vertical, it's still comics. It's still panels telling a sequential story. You know what I mean? Like we're comics. Like we're not some other thing, you know? So it is frustrating to me as a creator that they are as siloed as they are. And it's also been just bizarre looking at, I don't know, it's weird, right? Like it's just the scale of it. And it's the same way, like I also write, oddly, Call of Duty mobile comics, which are comics that are available to read within the Call of Duty mobile game. And those, I am not privy to give the exact numbers, but they are also like a scale of magnitude or two bigger than Urban Animal, which is a scale of magnitude bigger than direct comics. So it's like, it's not like there aren't lots of people that like comics. We're just not getting comics to those people oftentimes, you know, or we're not getting direct market comics. See, I'm doing it again, right?
Well,
like,
this is what I'm always saying too, is everyone reads comics. If you're on your social feed and then you're scrolling and you see a comic, guess what? You're gonna read it.
yeah, exactly.
And it's just the direct market comics is like, it's not all comics is, everyone. It's an art form.
Yeah,
It's a medium.
It is. Yeah, it's a medium, not a genre. So,
and do you think there's ever going to be a way that those fandoms won't be siloed?
Yes. And I'm hoping to get there first. But like, you know, just for a career longevity sort of thing. I think so. I think at some point, Marvel and DC kind of lead the direct market, and they are owned by enormous corporations. And for those corporations, by and large, what Marvel and DC stand for, what they are is IP farms. And that's fine for what it is. But I think you're going to get somebody forward looking in those positions that's going to look at something like Webtoons and that kind of stuff and think we could be there in a way that they're not. And it's not to say that they haven't done stuff to that sort of area. It's just that they make these sort of abortive attempts. Like John and I, you know, we met during the Zuda days, and I had 3 things in the Zuda competition, which Zuda was DC's first initiative at doing kind of a webcomics thing. And it was doing essentially an American Idol style voting thing for webcomics, and a lot of cool stuff came out of it. And I do think someday Marvel and DC are going to get into that, and I think they are probably going to lead the way. The thing is like I love single issue comics and I love the direct market, but fundamentally, to use an analogy here, what we've got is, I don't want to get too, I could probably rant on this for another hour, so I'm not going to try to keep this concise, but basically what direct market comic book shops are they're selling vinyl, right? If they were the music industry, they're selling records, they're selling vinyl, and that is a niche thing that is really cool, and if you're into it, it's awesome, but it can't be the only thing. And since they are dominated by like superhero comics that are, and this is not a knock on superhero comics, because Urban Animal is fundamentally a superhero comic, even though we don't go in for costumes for the most part.
Oh, you go with naked for the most part.
Yeah.
That is their
Superhero
costume.
we have not had enough Naked Joe this season. You know, we but superhero comics, as they are in the direct market, are built for a very specific kind of reader, right? Like, so this is true even for me, right? Like, I cannot pick up an issue by and large of most titles and have, or even an arc, and have an idea of what's going on. Like, there's so many crossovers and so much internecine kind of continuity stuff that they really do become inaccessible for somebody who's there. And it's also a matter of, like, you know, when you look at stuff like manga or webtoons or bookstore market stuff. So if you're in a One Piece, right? Like, you start at one and you go through the other 1,000 volumes or however much One Piece there is now, and it's a long journey, but it's straightforward and it's easy to start. If you want to read Urban Animal, it's episode 1 and you run through. We're not crossing over with Lore Olympus yet. Lore Olympus, you know, anytime. But you know, we don't cross over like that. But I just turned 43 last weekend. And
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
26 to 43? Big jump.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the 17th anniversary of my 26th birthday. And I have literally read comics my whole life. And what I mean by that is, one of my very earliest memories is reading, and again, I'm using my cartoon air quotes, reading a Popeye comic before I could read, right? I have memories of that. It was an issue with the Sea Hag and the Goons. And I was maybe 2, right? So I've got 40 years of reading comics, and I never got away from it. I read the Electric Company magazine to read Stan Lee's Spider-Man. I was reading, since I'm elderly, I was able to actually pick up comics at, you know, convenience stores and gas stations and stuff. So I was reading X-Men, you know, when Claremont was writing it originally and that kind of stuff. I've never been away from comics. But if you were coming into comics from outside and you said, okay, I want to read Batman, where do I start? I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
I cannot answer that question. I can't answer it about Spider-Man. I can't answer it about Superman. Like, I can pick out some things that I think would maybe work. Like, you know, if you're doing Batman, I think Batman is in the culture enough that people would be able to appreciate Dark Knight Returns, right? Or something like that. But by and large, like, I have no idea how to tell people to get into that stuff. And
Right.
that lack of a clear entry point and writing for that audience means that, as I loop way back around to my vinyl analogy, not only are we selling vinyl, we are, like, only selling vinyl that is the German clown reggae. Like, it's vinyl and it's for, like, an incredibly niche audience. And if you're into that, you'll buy it all. But it is also excluding a bunch of stuff. And I don't think that shouldn't exist. I'm not saying no more German clown reggae. What I am saying is that we need both a bigger pool of stuff for people to be buying vinyl, and within vinyl, we also need to be producing stuff that people who are not German clown reggae fans will like, you know. And those are not easy problems to solve, right? Just from a business standpoint, because for Marvel and DC to kind of get out of that, they've got to do something different than what they've done, and they've probably got to be willing to throw money at it for a while, you know. And that means they need to be able to see the corporations that parent them need to be able to see the upside potential of it. And I think they will at some point. I suspect that Webtoons and such and you know, the bookstore market are big enough animals that that'll become viable. But I don't think we're quite there yet. God, I've talked for a long time. Somebody else say something.
Well, to touch on the silo nature of all these different markets, it might be as simple as one, and I say simple just to simplify the idea. It might be as simple as having an IP that transcends all these markets. You know, an IP that with enough potential to transcend all those markets. And I genuinely think that's why something like Boku no Hero Academia is so popular right now, because it appeals to superhero fans and anime fans. And it's almost, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, Justin, but it's almost doing superheroes better than Marvel or DC can, in my opinion, anyway.
I think so. My Hero Academia is actually pretty amazing because it is such pure superheroes. Like, it's earnest and goofy, and I don't think superheroes need to be that, right? I think there is a space for, you know, edgy, darker superhero stuff. I mean, God knows I wrote Luther Strode, so it's not like I'm against that kind of stuff. But
Right.
My Hero Academia really does hit this sweet spot of like basically being like distilled, like cheerful superhero stuff. And I say that despite the fact that My Hero Academia can actually get pretty damn dark. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like straight up, it's a big part of the creative DNA for Urban Animal for me too, right? Like that is sort of the zone that I'm often trying to hit with Urban Animal, which, you know, one thing My Hero Academia does really well is kind of showing the consequences of this lifestyle and stuff, you know what I mean, with the pain and the suffering and that kind of stuff that it can do without actually being dark, right? The book is still it's not a dark book, despite there being occasional dark stuff. But yes, I agree. I think there's stuff that kind of transcends, and I think that IP kind of thing is probably the way it's going to need to go.
Are you familiar with that show, Dewey? That
I
anime?
actually have one of the manga here somewhere.
Oh, excellent.
And it's on my Netflix list, as are many things on my Netflix list.
It's
My
great stuff.
entire family is watching it and keeps telling me to watch it. And I'll be like, it's on my Netflix list. Don't worry.
You'd love it. You'd love it.
It's the anime is on Hulu in the US, which, oh man, I'm going to, this is a spoiled brat problem. It is it is frustrating that they have the dub and the sub both for each episode, which is good, but it ends up meaning that you can't just binge through the episodes. Like, you have to like stop and start, like skip every one, which is just, I realize how spoiled I've gotten by streaming stuff that this is actually an issue. I was like, wow.
Justin, this is important. Are you a dubs guy or a subs guy?
I am probably more a dubs guy.
I'm disappointed, but it's okay.
I know. I tend to what actually happens is that it's not the same, but I actually watch all my streaming stuff with subtitles on, so it's kind of both. But
Gotcha.
I have this love for over-the-top anime voices, so I often go in for the dubs because I just love some of the voice stuff. Just I always have. That's one of the things I've kind of always liked about anime, is just how.
Hey, I understand, and it's nice being able to look away sometimes.
Yes.
Right.
See, that's my problem. I'm a subs guy, but
Same.
I usually also want to be doing other stuff while I'm watching TV.
Right. I'll be drawing, so figure that out. It's tough.
Yeah, stuff like My Hero Academia and stuff makes me bummed out. I literally can't read manga. It's not manga per se that's the problem. It's that in the US it's always unflipped, and I if I try to read it, I will literally get a headache. Like I can't.
The right to left
do it, and it is deeply frustrating because there's lots of things that sound awesome, like 20th Century Boys and all that kind of stuff that like I just can't read. I was like, damn you.
Do you guys have a view on your readership, like the demographics of your readership? Do you have a view on that?
We do.
We do. Yeah.
They skew relative to direct market comics. And probably just generally they skew younger. So with Urban Animal, I have not checked the demographics this season because I have to ask for Webtoons about that, which they've provided if we want it.
Yeah.
But they tend to be late teens through mid 20s is probably the bulk of our audience. We skew actually more heavily male than most Webtoons do, but it still ends up being 60 or 70% guys. So we have a 30 to 40% female base.
Okay. Because I think Webtoons in general, Webtoons in general skews female. So if you say
it does.
Your skews male in relation, it's like,
yeah, Urban Animal actually skews by Webtoon standards. We actually skew pretty male, pretty hard. By direct market comic standards, like having it's not that girls absolutely read comics, but a lot of like the direct market in general still tends to skew more male than that.
Significantly more.
significantly more male and significantly older.
Yeah.
So our audience is a lot younger and a lot more female. And it doesn't, the demographic information doesn't include people who are non-binary and that sort of stuff. So the male-female thing is what I got in terms of information. So
Yes.
Yeah, those are all the analytics still. It's still male
Correct.
female. What can you say about season 4 coming up, and when's it out, and what can your fans expect? Are some fan theories close to what you're going to be doing?
yeah, I mean, there are so many fan theories that I think just by sheer statistics, some of them will get right. But also because we try to build, each season into the previous season in terms of seeds and that kind of stuff. The really astute readers have got an idea of where we're going. It's interesting. There is one very significant chunk of season 4 that nobody really seems to have predicted coming, which is odd because it seems like it would be the really obvious thing that's happening based on season 3. He said, as unspoilery as he could be.
Do I know what it is? What's going on? What's happening now?
That's how unspoilery it is. John
He's got a
doesn't know what
cape.
it is.
No, it's the Craven stuff, which
Oh, okay.
well, not mean
Gotcha.
anything to them. Nobody seems to anticipate that, like, despite, what's going on in season 3. Like, it seems to me like that would be a thing that, like, we would clearly be picking up on, but, like, they
Right.
have focused on the other aspects of it, which I guess is fair. The other stuff is flashier.
Well, we like to do this thing at the end of every season. We do a Q&A, and then the last image at that Q&A is usually a teaser for the forthcoming season. I predict that when we show the teaser for season 4, nobody's gonna understand what's going on. It's like, what?
No,
Who?
no, I was actually thinking about that. I'm like, I will bet that they think that's a character name. That is what I'm going with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's gonna
it'll
be
be fun.
crazy.
I'm really interested to see how they react to that.
Dewey, you asked what to expect, and Justin gave you his answer. I will say that reading our outline and preparatory scripts, I will say it has necessitated me learning how to draw military vehicles. That's all I'm gonna say.
I feel like
a lot of that.
I feel like this comic has led to you doing a lot of research, John.
A little bit. I can draw. I can
Lots of
pretty much
Google
draw.
image searches.
Well, season 1, season 2, yeah, I can pretty much draw a rat with no reference at this point. It's crazy.
From
Just
any angle.
repetition. Yeah, absolutely.
You guys had a Kickstarter for a print copy of Urban Animal. Is that just for season 1? Or
It is.
okay, so for season 1, and that was way over the limit. I think you went 9 times over the goal there.
It did well, and we will be kickstarting the future seasons. Basically, one book a season. It makes for a pretty meaty book. I think the season 1 one's probably going to end up being like 200-ish pages, so it's a pretty good sized trade. And then we'll kickstart the subsequent seasons individually.
And
yeah, it's
when
really
can
well.
they expect the first book?
So we are trying to get all the production stuff finished this month. So hopefully it will be printing and shipping within the next month or two, is the goal. It is, obviously all the content exists, but so one of the reasons that we kickstarted with Rocket Ship Entertainment is that Rocket Ship Entertainment specializes in converting webtoons to print, because that is a non-trivial process. Because we learned early on that
It's different.
it's very different, and
Oh, yeah.
and a webtoon first. And one of the reasons, basically, I am incapable of doing the work, and John doesn't have time while we're still doing the comic book. So either it was work with Rocket Ship or no trades for however long Urban Animal runs, and we wanted to get them out. I also like the Rocket Ship people; they do an excellent job, so no complaints there. But that is one of the reasons we got there, because it turns out drawing a weekly comic takes up a lot of time. Who knew?
We found that out the hard way. But
Yeah.
laying it out, as I'm working on it, as you know, it's a vertical scroll. That doesn't translate very easily to the printed page. So Rocket Ship became a necessary element because they handle all the reformatting, and they've been doing a pretty good job so far. We've seen some proofs of the early pages, and it looks good. So
How's that
the
work? Do they just
Kickstarter.
fit everything in like a Tetris thing, or?
Well, I imagine a bunch of them are actually comic artists themselves. I could be wrong about that, but or editors at the very least. But they take the panels from the web comic and they format it in such a way that it reads perfectly uh, Z style, and it's easy to follow. They even go as far as rearranging the word balloons so that it's got more of a flow that works for a printed page.
Do they
So
remaster any artwork or make sure, fill in the gaps or whatever? Or is that you?
uh, I will say there have been a handful of panels that I have retouched, probably because I was unhappy. I've become unhappy with some of them, but yeah, I will say it's
The
it's gonna look
artist's
good.
eternal dilemma.
Yeah, oh yeah. I reviewed season 1 last month or a couple of months ago, and I was like, this looks terrible. Some of these characters don't look the same in season 3, and like, then this is just me like criticizing myself because I tend to be overcritical, and I appreciate that the fans love season 1 still. We've got new fans all the time, but like to me, uh, I just feel like I could have done better. So I hope that with every new panel that I do better. But you know how it goes.
And I asked this earlier, but I don't think I got an answer. When is season 4 starting?
Are we allowed to say, Justin?
Uh, I don't know. I'm gonna say
Yeah.
it's scheduled for early June right now. So I would assume that will be the case. So it's about 3 months out. It takes a bit to get the lead time that we need. So, but it's not too far.
And my last question is for people who are looking to get into Webtoon or doing web comics, what advice would you give them?
I mean, for me, I would say straight up read a lot of webtoons and learn and deconstruct what they're doing, which is sort of a craft answer. After that, pair up with an artist or be an artist yourself, and come up with something and try to get to know one of the editors there. That is, I don't know how you would do that because I didn't do it that way, but that is I have introduced a few of my artist friends to some editors there and that kind of stuff. So if you can find a way in to probably do that. But I think the first thing to nail is that craft aspect, because the vertical scrolling thing is like a unique sort of thing, and it obviously is very different from an art side, but it actually is also very different from a writing side, or at least it was for me. One of the things we did early on is I was trying to use my scripting technique from print comics for Urban Animal, and I realized like with the first episode, like it doesn't work. Like
It had page turns, right?
Yeah, you end up writing for page turns that aren't there, and it just and that seems like it wouldn't matter, but it actually screws up the flow. So what I had to do, because of basically writer's muscle memory, is do an entirely new script template for Urban Animal and Webtoons that doesn't have any of that page stuff. So yeah, and that and learning, a lot of it is just learning what you can and can't do in Webtoons, because it is different from both more conventional web comics that don't use that scrolling aspect, and it is very different from print comics. There are just different sets of expectations and different ways to use the space and ways to use the scroll format in terms of how you're telling the story. So it is really important to read a lot of webtoons and to do it with an eye towards deconstruction and figuring out what they're doing and how they're doing it. So I think that would be my advice.
What are you, John?
My advice would be, because when we did season 1, I was pretty much learning on the job. I had never colored my own sequentials before, and as you probably know, Doi, I do inks and colors for Urban Animal, and learned very quickly, I think episode 1 and 2, I learned very quickly that I could not realistically do heavy detailed backgrounds and hit the deadline. So be open, and this is the advice, be open to parsing down or simplifying your style so that you can meet a weekly deadline and have a proper workflow for yourself so that you don't need to keep second guessing what the next step is going to be. You just need to know the story and then already have a workflow for how to put that down into art. And, stick to a schedule. That always helps.
You know what else it is? Your simplified style makes it easier to scroll. Like it's just an easier flow, as opposed to if I were looking at, Alfredo Alcala type art.
Oh yeah. It is.
I was like, who's the most detailed person I know?
Right.
It's funny because I don't think most people think about it, but there is a reason that Webtoons tends towards a more, for lack of a better term, manga style. And it's the same reason that manga has that style, right? Which is that it's a weekly thing, and you just, by and large, with some exceptions, you can't draw hyper detailed stuff on a weekly schedule if you're one person. Yeah. So it's kind of funny because the style actually, it's both kind of the house style bit with stuff that's popular, but it's also an emergent property of just how the schedule works. You just need to do it that way.
Oh, and my actual last question, speaking about the style, is there any discussion, anything you can say about a possible adaptation?
Into another medium?
Into another medium, yeah. You guys been talking to people?
No. We've had some interest, and I am hopeful that once we get the print edition out, we will get even more. So there's this weird thing that I have realized, which is with Hollywood and media adaptation, you need to have the physical book, right? Like, it's weird, right? Like, so.
It's because Hollywood executives are old and don't know how to use the internet.
Yeah, they are, but even the ones that are younger than I am, like, it's still not real if they can't touch it. So it cracks me up, right? That like I have optioned books that literally I have optioned books that have sold like 3,000 copies, right? So they are like a tiny percentage of that, but like they are more real to Hollywood than Urban Animal is, because Urban Animal is a webcomic, right? Like there are some weird exceptions to that, like not in webcomics really so much, but like you can kind of get around that with like now a little bit with podcasts, right? Like, you've had Dirty John and stuff converted into a television show or lore and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, we have not had a huge amount of interest in it relative to other stuff because it does not exist in a print one. So once we get the print book out, I am hopeful that will go, because Urban Animal, because it is a Webtoons thing, and because of what I think of how it's written, I think it is something that is right for adaptation into another form. It fits very naturally like into a TV format because it is written as an episodic, kind of thing. So we've had a little bit of interest there, and it didn't really work out. But I am hopeful that will change once we get the print edition out.
Yeah, because you're not gonna get a Hollywood exec to install Webtoon on their phone.
No,
it's unlikely.
Their loss. Well, pulling for you guys on that, and I'm sure so are 485,000 other people. Thank you guys for coming on the show.
Thanks, man.
Urban Animal is great. Everybody go on Webtoon. All you got to do is install Webtoon on your phone or your tablet, and then look for Urban Animal.
Correct. Or you can read it on your browser.
You can.
That's how I do
on your
it.
phone, though.
Yeah.
I've tried it on both. It is better on your phone.
It is better on the phone, right? Like I who read it on the desktop, I straight up admit, I'm like, oh, this is better on the phone. Like, it just is. Like, it's like they've really nailed that optimizing for the device part of it. So
yeah, you know what it is? It's when you go on Comixology, you see the digital versions of direct market comics, and then you can tell it's supposed to be a print or something. The natural inclination when you're on a mobile device is to scroll downwards.
Exactly. Part of it
So-
also, and this is like a little inside baseball, part of it is when we have tense moments in the story, and I realize we're ending the show, but when we have tense moments in the story, I make sure that the length between the panels is exactly one phone screen. So
yeah,
it builds tension that way, and it forces you to scroll
and
because you have an entire screen that's
color
blank.
it in too.
Exactly.
Well, you have colors to kind of, because there were times when the image didn't load, and I didn't know if you were doing that or if my screen went blank.
Uh-oh. Well, I hope it worked out.
And it worked out
Right?
because then it started loading, and I'm like, oh, okay. We
There
have
you go.
slow internet in the Philippines. Okay.
It's true. It's true, Justin.
Oh, yeah, thank you guys. Okay.
Realize that though I am an American, I live in the deep hinterlands of the U.S., so it's not terrific around here either.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you guys.
Yeah,
Links down below.
Thanks, man.